Hi all, I really appreciated the amazing feedback and comments I've been getting on the channel. Real quick, before we get started, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, it would really help us out. Okay, here we go.
Proud Captain Redbeard rules the waves, best pirate ship on the seas. Bosun Will is the brains of the crew, he helps find treasure keys. First mate Rummy enjoys a drink, but this will make him sleep. Jimbo was a stowaway, but him we'd like to keep. Young Anne from the islands enjoys adventures whenever she can. Flashfort the cook fixes the meals, but I wouldn't complain. He's a hot-tempered man. There's 2 more creatures on board the ship. This makes up all of the crew. Mischievous Monkey Spinosa and Popsy the parrot too. Yes, Popsy the parrot too.
Of all the pirates who sailed the seas during the golden age of piracy, from dark-eyed Kate Putnam to Captain Archibald, one name stands out as the most notorious and influential buccaneer in history, Captain Redbeard. His career was longer than any other pirate. He captured hundreds of ships and won, lost, hunted, and hid vast fortunes over his lifetime. His list of friends was short and his list of enemies long, though they intertwined so much that it was often hard to tell whose side he was on. In this 8-part Brick Lore documentary series, we'll piece together lore from the LEGO sets, comics, audio dramas, and video games to tell the story of one of the most beloved figures in LEGO history, Captain Redbeard. The once legendary pirate now spent much of his time in the Keg and Cutlass Inn on Forbidden Island, reminiscing about the old days with the landlady, Bessie Anchor. Her husband had been among the many pirates executed at El Dorado Fortress after an ill-fated attack in rowboats years before. Anne, the daughter of the landlady at the Keg and Cutlass, wasn't afraid of her father's fate. She began making herself indispensable to the crew, proving to be an able gunner. She tried to take on the nickname Band Anna, but it didn't stick. The remainder of Redbeard's crew had settled in on the Black Sea's Barracuda. Will, now over 10 years older than when he'd first come aboard the Brick Bounty, had risen to the post of bosun. Redbeard occasionally despaired that the young man would never become a proper pirate, as Will was still a bookworm who didn't drink rum. Still, he had become one of the most notorious pirates in the area. Rummy, nearly deafened from his years as gunner, took over from Slinger as Redbeard's first mate. Though he was often drunk, he was an excellent sailor and proved to be a better helmsman than a gunner. Never one to turn away children in need, Redbeard also allowed a young stowaway named Jimbo to stay on as cabin boy. Another key member of the Barracuda's crew was Quartermaster Riggins. The Bluecoat governors who administered the tropical colonies in the Caribbean were corrupt and greedy. From Hacienda to McGair to the newly appointed Tierney, all cared far more about their political influence and the treasure they could skim off the top of imperial taxes than the well-being of the settlers they were supposed to protect, or the faraway king whose interests they had been appointed to serve. But the worst of them all was Governor Broadside of Sabatina. Over a decade after executing William Cavendish, Broadside was still enjoying the fruit of the settlers' labor while scheming to add to his already considerable fortune. Broadside had a number of spies and informants, among them Brick Bildmore and his dog, Comet. One such agent was on the trail of the legendary pirate treasure of the Blackheart cousins. Captain John Blackheart, also known as Captain Bluebrick, was one of the most infamous pirates of his day. Between 50 and 60 years before, he had been known for his battles with fellow pirate Captain Redbrick, also known as Captain Goodbrick, and also ran afoul of the previous governor of Sabatina. John and his cousin Brian had captured an enormous fortune, but knowing that the governor's forces were in pursuit, they had to split up to escape. They scratched a map to the treasure's location on a golden medallion and split the coin in two so that neither could recover the treasure on his own. John Blackheart was last seen in the jungle south of Sabatina. Broadside's agent managed to recover his half of the medallion, now attached to a collar around a pet monkey named Spinoza, after the Dutch philosopher. The agent carefully documented his investigation of the decades-old mystery, placed the documents in a chest, and sent it along with Spinoza aboard the governor's supply vessel, Golden Loot. Broadside didn't know the details of his agent's treasure quest, but eagerly awaited the Golden Loot's arrival in Port Royal. There was only one factor Broadside failed to anticipate: Captain Redbeard. Also traveling aboard the Golden Loot were two members of Broadside's family, his sister Prudence Broadside and their niece Camilla. The bold young woman saw right through Redbeard's infamous reputation. She also fell in love with Bosun Will at first sight, and Will became smitten as well. The governor's second-in-command, Lieutenant de Martinet, attempted to rally the Bluecoat soldiers, but quickly surrendered after realizing they were no match for a ship full of pirates. Redbeard and de Martinet had crossed paths before, and the lieutenant's quick surrender did nothing to raise Redbeard's already low opinion of the man. Redbeard stripped the Golden Loot of her cargo, including the chest containing the Blackheart documents. Redbeard ordered Rummy to throw the chest overboard, not realizing its importance. As the Barracuda sailed away, leaving the Golden Loot behind, Redbeard warned Will against entertaining the notion of a relationship with the governor's niece, but he was too smitten to listen. Back at Forbidden Island, Redbeard found the half medallion around Spinoza's neck with some help from Jimbo. Thanks to a chance meeting with Peter, an elderly member of Blackheart's original crew, Redbeard discovered that the Blackheart's bosun Skip was alive and making a living as a banana seller in Port Royal. Perhaps it was coincidence, but Peter himself bore a passing resemblance to the long-vanished John Blackheart. Redbeard knew that Skip was his best lead to finding the other half of the medallion. Against Will's better judgment, the two snuck into Port Royal, dodging Bluecoat patrols as they went. Redbeard found a kindred spirit in Skip, though he hoped never to leave the pirate's life behind as the old shopkeeper had. Redbeard suggested that Skip might be Brian Blackheart himself, though Skip quickly dismissed the notion. The old bosun revealed that after separating from his cousin, Brian had led a raid on Port Royal. The attack was a disaster, and both were quickly captured. Skip had been imprisoned for 20 years, while Brian had been locked away in the deepest dungeon in El Dorado Fortress. Rumor had it that he had hidden the other half of the medallion here before being sent to Europe and condemned. Will was arrested by an Imperial patrol shortly afterwards. Redbeard would never let his friend be executed by Broadside, but he would wait just long enough to allow Will time to find the other half of the coin. That night, Redbeard blasted his way into the dungeon with stolen gunpowder. He found that he'd interrupted a midnight visit by Camilla, who fled along with the pirates to avoid her uncle's wrath. Fortunately for the captain, Will had been able to find the other half of the medallion. With both halves reunited, Redbeard finally recognized the location of the treasure, Shipwreck Island. This island was infamous among the pirates of the time for the many ships that had been lost around it over the years, which led to rumors of a monstrous kraken lurking in one of the island's caves. The island's location remains difficult to pinpoint in modern times. Most renderings of the island are inconsistent, and it was known by many other names, including Copper Eye Island, Tricorn Island, and Sombrero Island. It may have been the island off Sabatina marked on many charts as Pirate Hat Island. The island's distinctive volcano probably inspired most of the hat comparisons. The volcano was quite active and named Mount Doom on at least one map. The island's most infamous name was Treasure Island, although whether this was the same location made famous by Captain Flint's hidden treasure is unknown. Many had attempted to find treasure here, few had returned. One such pirate was Argenta, who had found a hidden treasure here years before with one of her rogue pirates, escaping a Bluecoat soldier on the way. This may have been how Redbeard became familiar with the island. Unfortunately, Captain Fowl and his first mate Culverin had overheard their conversation with Peter on Forbidden Island and had been shadowing them ever since, hoping to find the treasure. When Redbeard returned to the Black Sea's Barracuda, he found that Fowl had taken over his ship. Fowl nearly made Will walk the plank before Redbeard surrendered the map. Unlike Redbeard, Fowl had no compunctions about keeping Camilla prisoner to ransom back to Broadside. Fowl set Redbeard and Will adrift on the castaways' raft, expecting that the sharks would dispose of them eventually. Instead, a fortuitous hurricane sent the raft crashing into Shipwreck Island. Fowl had already retrieved the treasure, but Redbeard and Will rallied the crew to fight back against Fowl's pirates. They were interrupted by Governor Broadside, who had been alerted to the treasure's location by Redbeard's own parrot, and had brought his flagship Iron Ram, escorted by the smaller, faster Caribbean Clipper. All three groups were forced to flee the island when Mount Doom erupted. Redbeard refused to leave the treasure behind. He only made it out alive when Spinoza knocked him out with a coconut, allowing Will and Rummy to carry him to safety. In the confusion, Redbeard's pirates were able to retake the Black Sea's Barracuda, forcing Fowl and Culverin to flee on their own Barracuda. Camilla was rescued by Broadside during the eruption, but the adventure would only be her first with Will. The bosun made his first successful Atlantic crossing not too long after, and received the traditional anchor tattoo on his arm. Camilla would quickly come to identify this mark with her newfound friend. While they certainly weren't friends before, Redbeard now made a persistent enemy in D. Martinet. Broadside's second-in-command had his eye on the governorship himself, and had been embarrassed by Redbeard's capture of the golden loot and the break-in at Eldorado Fortress. D. Martinet saw the deployment of reinforcements to Port Royal after the incident, including over 100 dragoons. His vendetta against the captain would one day cost Redbeard dearly. Redbeard was inconsolable at the loss of the treasure. This wasn't the last expedition the pirates made to Shipwreck Island, though the treasure was buried under lava and irretrievable. The pirates established a hideout among the ruined vessels there, and the castaway's raft was reconstructed. If there was a bright spot to Redbeard's misadventures in treasure hunting, it was that the captain seemed to find a taste for bananas and fresh fish during the Golden Medallion affair. They soon became some of his favorite foods. This complete reversal of his former eating habits seems to have done wonders for the captain's apparent malnutrition, and his distinctive red beard began making a gradual comeback. Redbeard's newfound appreciation for fish created another opportunity for Spinoza to cause mischief when the monkey stole the gold key to the ship's cash box and leapt onto the boat of Binnacle, an old fisherman who supplied the pirates. Redbeard knew that most fishing boats came to the fish market on Port Royal, but Will managed to convince Redbeard to go in disguise to avoid being captured again. The entire crew joined in the charade, dressing up in their finest clothes and doing their best to disguise the Black Sea's Barracuda, even naming her the Skylark. Redbeard's full moon-induced gold-sniffing trance nearly got the pirates captured anyway, but they were able to learn that Binnacle sold his fish to the islanders rather than at the Port Royal market. They retrieved Spinoza from Binnacle's boat, but not before Redbeard accidentally fell into the sea while pursuing the monkey, much to the amusement of the crew. Unbeknownst to Redbeard, his gold-induced trance had been brought about by a lost golden pendant belonging to Camilla, a gift from her uncle. It had been swallowed by one of the fish the pirates had stolen at the market. Will arranged to have the pendant returned in a box marked with his anchor tattoo, further strengthening their relationship. Redbeard soon returned to Port Royal, this time pursuing rumors of a treasure ship that was supposed to arrive soon. It was all a ruse for Will, Rummy, and the crew to sneak in and steal supplies for the captain's birthday party, which was a long-standing tradition among the Redbeard pirates. While the captain had a nasty petty streak that frequently saw him threaten and abandon even those closest to him, he was still beloved by his shipmates. They seized on his birthdays as an occasion for the whole crew to celebrate, and let down their tough pirate facades for a time. The pirates managed to escape from both the Port Royal soldiers and Captain Fowl with a birthday cake stolen from Governor Broadside. They even presented Redbeard with a beautifully carved peg leg, which he wore on special occasions. Meanwhile, exiled from his crew and family, the pirate No-Beard had made the best of his lot. He acquired his own ship and began assembling a crew, hoping to earn the respect of his father. The No-Beard pirates were among the most unruly on the high seas, for they had only one rule: no beards allowed. No-Beard was able to reconcile to a degree with his old friend Governor Tierney after resolving a misunderstanding involving a mysterious ice curse upon his crew in a frozen Bluecoat village. After this, No-Beard left his father's territory in the Caribbean and set course for the Pacific coast, the haunt of legendary pirates such as One-Eyed Willie. At least 1 month after his birthday, Redbeard didn't feel like celebrating. They'd only managed to capture a single schooner, and that prize had yielded only 3 doubloons, 2 of which were fake. He led the crew to the Keg and Cutlass Tavern to drown their disappointment, only to be taunted by Fowl, who had returned from his most successful voyage yet. While the crew had managed to get the best of Fowl during their raid on Port Royal, Fowl and his crew were now on a piratical hot streak, having seized a rich treasure ship the previous month. The 2 crews came to blows, threatening to destroy Bessie's tavern in the process. Anne saved her mother's livelihood by claiming that Fowl's Barracuda was being attacked. Embarrassed, Fowl kidnapped Anne several days later and held her hostage at Shark Island, demanding a ransom of 1,000 doubloons, well over $1 million when adjusted for inflation. Redbeard refused to pay ransoms on principle, but in any case, neither Redbeard nor Bessie had such a huge sum. Bessie agreed to provision the Black Sea's Barracuda for a rescue mission instead. Will and Jimbo were able to rescue Anne from Fowl with the help of Popsy and Spinoza. The pirates even got a portion of Fowl's treasure after Spinoza hid it in one of the Barracuda's cannon, which Culverin then fired on their escape craft. Redbeard brought his crew back to Forbidden Island to celebrate. Fowl returned to bedevil the Redbeard pirates again and again in the following months, with his ruthless methods frequently giving him the advantage. He weaseled his way back into Bessie's tavern after abducting her daughter, which seems to have caused Anne Anchor to leave the Redbeard pirates for a time so as not to be targeted by Fowl again. Fowl also interfered in Will and Rummy's search for the White Cliff treasure map. Thanks to a tip-off from the monk Jeremias, Will's old mentor in Port Royal, Fowl made off with a chest full of gold that Governor Broadside had embezzled from the settlers' royal taxes. Jeremias was no friend of Fowl's, but he probably enjoyed seeing Broadside's plans disrupted. Redbeard learned of Fowl's latest heist from Peter, the elderly vagabond he had befriended during the Golden Medallion adventure. Fed up with Fowl's winning streak, Redbeard decided to pull off a heist of his own. He knew Fowl's secret hideout, a bay hidden within a rocky mountain on Forbidden Island. Redbeard and Will stole the gold under the cover of night and sent the treasure to the Black Sea's Barracuda over the mountain by means of a clever pulley system. Redbeard himself traveled down the zipline first, paranoid that even Will might steal the treasure and leave him behind. Redbeard misread the bosun's intentions. Will was actually determined to give the gold back to the citizens of Sabatina. Will wouldn't let the subject go as the pirates made their escape, but Redbeard refused, threatening to end their friendship over the matter. The pair made it safely back to the ship, but Redbeard's impulsive pride nearly doomed the pirates. He gave the order to open fire to taunt Fowl, who had no way to get under sail in time to catch the Barracuda. Instead, he alerted the Iron Ram, which was cruising under the command of de Martinet nearby. Redbeard was forced to surrender to save his crew. He was ashamed to have endangered them, but anguished at the thought of losing the treasure. De Martinet sailed the Iron Ram and the captured Black Sea's Barracuda into Port Royal, where a huge crowd gathered to watch the execution of the pirate crew. For once, de Martinet had gained favor in the eyes of Governor Broadside. Redbeard was as surprised as anyone when the treasure chest exploded. Will had rigged the chest to explode with a little help from Jimbo. The pair had trained Spinoza to light a fuse at the appropriate moment. Will immediately took advantage of the situation, telling the gathered citizens that Broadside had stolen the gold and that Redbeard had returned it to them as a gift. Shocked, Redbeard was forced to play along so that he and the other pirates could escape in the confusion. De Martinet's success turned into embarrassment as he was thrown overboard by the pirates. The lieutenant's professional opposition to the captain was rapidly boiling into a full-on vendetta. Broadside's image was ruined, his thievery was revealed, and the gold he had taken pains to hide from government inspectors was lost. Worst of all, the citizens of Sabatina were cheering Redbeard as a hero. While Redbeard was disappointed at the loss of the treasure, he couldn't help but be impressed with the way Will and Jimbo had trained Spinoza to aid them in their escape. Redbeard was accustomed to training sharks, and he began scheming to adapt his skill to monkeys as well. Although Redbeard didn't know it at the time, Will's intervention had been more valuable than a chest of stolen tax money. Redbeard had become relevant once more in the eyes of the settlers. But Redbeard's next adventure would put him on a side no one expected.